I've noticed that everyone's taken down the microphone, so I'm just going to follow the leader. I suspect that's probably the best way to go about it. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you're all doing okay. I know it's probably been a very long day. Your head is full of urbanism, and you're wondering, how do you take all this good information and get out there and do more with it? I'm hoping that this is going to keep you I think I'm following the same theme. Obviously, we're here talking about Main Streets, and we're putting it from, and we're approaching the issue with an architectural conservation lens. And I know that I missed parts of the morning, but I also recognize that there were probably lots of things said about the city. Recognizing that perhaps there might be this monolithic image of what the city would be. I think it's important for me to say, as one city councillor, I don't believe that the city is just one thing, one shapeless blob. Every single one of us are active players and instigators, and as well as citizens and residents of this city. So I'm going to give you my little point of view as a councillor, and maybe afterwards we'll dive into it a little bit more during the panel discussion. So the presentation is called On the Tip of My Yonge. Yeah, you know what? Yonge Street's my favorite street. There was a very significant event that actually took place in 2011. You may recognize this image. I felt it. I stood on the corner of Yonge Street, right at Yonge and Gould, and watched the Empress Hotel burn down. For those who are really granular part of the neighborhood, you'll recognize that that was also the Salad King. For all the Ryerson students out there, that was the big iconic asset that fell down. And having worked at Ryerson University for the sort of student campus radio station called CKLN back in the day when there was still that campus radio station. I knew that building as the home of Salad King. Later on as a city councillor, I recognized it as the Empress Hotel. So I was elected in 2010, and that hotel and that structure, that beautiful heritage structure, burnt down exactly 34 days after I was sworn in on December the 1st, 2010. It also happened to be 7 days right before I was going to have a very large community meeting where we were bringing together the downtown Yonge BIA, trying to find the property owner, and as well as city staff and heritage staff, city planning staff, to try to get them to invest money in that building because we could literally see the bricks falling out of that building. The story, of course, for those who end up following the 6-alarm fire is that there was a very prolific arsonist, and he was eventually charged with 29 counts of arson. But anyways, that's what I was looking at. I was standing there, and I remember thinking, as a new councillor, feeling a little bit overwhelmed, to be quite honest, like, wow, this is a lot of responsibility. I'm not even sure what I should be saying to the local community. We had plans to just restore the building, to encourage the property owner to do the right thing. And as I had a moment to stand on the corner of Yonge and Gould, I decided that it needed to be a bigger conversation than just tackling the brick and mortar of a heritage building on Yonge Street. And the conversation, I would say, for the community hasn't stopped. And I would say that I was probably just stepping into what has been a long time discussion of what to do with the most prolific and iconic Main Street, not just of downtown Toronto, but I would say Ontario, and dare I say Canada. So, 386 Yonge Street, what is that? Well, you might recognize it as the Aura. This, at one point, was going to be the tallest residential tower in Canada. It quickly got engulfed. And of course, subsequently, we've now seen many more tall towers pop up and down the street, especially the extraordinary heights that we're seeing at Yonge and Bloor. But at this particular point in time, I think that because it was sort of a precedent-setting new building for Yonge Street, and the extraordinary height that it reached at that point in time was 78 stories. That's about 274 metrics in terms of metric measurements. It came down crashing onto the corner of Yonge and Gerrard. I got this quote for you, Sean, because I knew we were going to spend some time together. And this set about, I would say, a new change for the downtown section of Yonge Street. This is an image that you may recognize for those who really study the patterns of planning and urban design. There was a document in 2010 that was adopted by City Council. It talked about specifically inviting change in downtown Toronto. I'm not sure if those who were involved with putting this document together was getting ready for the change that we end up seeing, but you'll see two particular sections of it. Where the Aura building is on, I guess it's on your right-hand side. That's the cross-section of Yonge and Gerrard, where there was going to be expected height. But I don't think anybody expected to go over 40 stories. And then at the corner of Yonge and Bloor, we were supposed to see unlimited height. I've heard that from planning staff so many times, I thought, what is this thing called unlimited height? And is it the same here as it is in Abu Dhabi, or is it the same here as in Hamilton? What is this unlimited height? But those were really the two quadrants of downtown Yonge Street, two little cross-sections where we're supposed to see this height. And even then, what's been proposed to the City of Toronto has exceeded every expectation, I would say, of the city planning staff. So we got that part, at least in a document. So that was the north end and the south end of this little stretch of Yonge Street. Gerrard and Yonge, and then Gerrard and Bloor. What we didn't know was what's going to happen in the middle of all that. So the connective tissue of this dynamic Main Street, there was very little vocabulary, or even, I think, expectations that we were going to see these massive land assemblies take place. Of course, that would be extremely naive now that I think back to how I see the city being planned by the OMB. We knew, we should have known, that when the Aura came along and the settlement came about in 2013, that was, sorry, 2010 when they broke ground, but 2006, I think they settled, somewhere like, no, 2010 they settled, 2013, they significantly broke ground. I believe that's where we started to see the change of Yonge Street. Now, this is just another layer, because Yonge Street's been around for 100 plus years, so this is the latest layer of urban acupuncture, tactical urbanism, whatever you want to call it. Just more stuff is happening. Okay, so you saw that image of me that was younger back in 2011. Yonge Street hasn't changed too much. Some of the businesses have come and gone. We're still looking for what to do, how to define this street. And so I started, oh, I don't know what happened there. We started to just look around and say, okay, is there anyone that can give us a hand that can help us reimagine this street? So I spoke to city planning staff. I'm still a relatively new councillor. It's still 2011. I asked city planning staff, you know, it'd be great if we actually had some documents, some guiding principles beyond the inviting change in downtown Yonge, because it's too broad. Let's get way more local. Let's start talking at the micro level of what this street should look like. And city planning staff, to their, and this is no slight on them, because they're amazing. These people work incredibly hard, and there's an onslaught of applications. Every single planner has 100 plus files. You couldn't even handle 100 plus files. I can't even barely handle 100 plus files, but that's what they're dealing with. And they said to me, Councillor, you're gonna have to get in the queue, right? If you want a planning document, you've been there, anybody who's been an activist for a neighborhood association, if you want a planning document, you're gonna get in line. Well, this neighborhood's not getting in line, and we decided to rally and turn the efforts, what started off as a conversation about preserving one building, the Empress Hotel, into a bigger conversation with Ryerson University, the Downtown Yonge BIA, a number of the individual stakeholders who came together and said, we're gonna put together our own planning study. And so we did it, and that planning study became the Yonge Street Planning Framework in 2011. We generated this document, turned around in 4 months. KPMB, Marianne McKenna was with us, as well as Ken Greenberg. You will all know them as friends, and also big urban thinkers, award-winning architects, urban planners. And this document was then put into the hands of city planning. And we said, look, 4 months, 5 months later, we're going to give you this document. We figured out how to take care of Yonge Street. It speaks around heritage. It speaks about the setbacks. It talks about the angular plane. It does all those things, pays attention to the history of the street and everything else. City planning staff said, thank you. Put it on a shelf. That's 2011. They didn't agree with a lot of the conclusions that was drawn in the document, so they didn't know what to do with it at that time. So subsequently afterwards, they decided that they needed to put up their own documents, their own papers. So, and I have to say, for those for those from the community who are here from the Church Wellesley Neighborhood Association, as well as the Bay Clover Hill Community Association, I need to tip my hat to you, because those two particular groups were such big champions of Yonge Street. We released our original plan in 2011. The neighborhood said, wow, they've shelved our plan. What are we going to do now? So while we were chipping away on the outside edges, other documents came about. Whether it's the North Downtown Yonge guidelines, planning guidelines, design guidelines, or other documents, these documents really help us set what we thought could be the new planning regime for this section of Yonge Street. 2015, the historic Yonge Street HCD got adopted. That was our plan. 2016, now these are city plans now. So they agree. So then 2016, we got the North Downtown Yonge OPA 382. That was a big deal. What do you think happened next? Oh, you missed, oh. It was so much more dynamic on Google Slide. I'm sorry, guys. So what you would have seen there was a big red, some big red text that said OMB appealed. So our documents that we worked on for 4 years and 5 years respectively, then they took it for a ride to the Ontario Municipal Board. City planning is still trying to catch up, as you know. And of course, this document, I had a small, modest hand in initiating it in 2013 while we were debating at Toronto East Shore Community Council, how much is enough? How tall is enough? How much density is enough? When do we say no? Can we say no? I'd like to say no from time to time. I would love to say no, but then we're always dealing with that big OMB. And city planning, of course, passed this secondary plan, 25-year document that's supposed to set out the vision for the downtown Toronto and our growth. And guess where this document is sitting? Not quite the OMB, but it's sitting at the Ministry of the Environment because it needs to be approved from the province. Okay, so while we're getting those things sorted out, we're still planning, we're still trying to figure out how to manage Yonge Street. Development leaps ahead. Applications will still keep coming. And this is just a snapshot of what's come in. This is not all of Yonge Street, of course, and especially not even close to all of downtown Yonge. But while we're trying to get the planning framework out, while we're trying to settle down on the HCD and everything else, development continues to leap ahead. And as development leaps ahead, what comes next? Mr. McGee? Mr. McGee from the 1950s was a cartoon character. You recognize him as being extremely nearsighted. He couldn't really figure out anything. He was a very affable character, always sort of rumbling into trouble because he couldn't see very well. All that development and the land speculation brought about new changes with the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. They're the largest property assessor in North America. 5 million properties they assess every single 4 years, and that assessment, it's all legislated under the Assessment Act, that assessment is used by municipalities and local governments to set taxes using the mill rate. So, yeah, taxes went up. I didn't see your presentation, Claire, but I suspect you probably talked about that a lot as well, and I know that John Carew from Tabia certainly did. So we mentioned, I think I heard you mention Cat's Cradle. So Cat's Cradle is a great example. They had no intentions of selling. They were not going anywhere. They had been part of the Yonge Street community for a very long time. MPAC came along and said, hey, you could be valued at a 40-story tower. So why don't I just slap that assessment on for you? Oh, it really was way more dynamic on Google Slide. Anyways, the slide that you missed would have just shown you the massive trajectory of how the valuation went right through the roof. And of course, what that resulted in was massive tax hikes for these properties, anywhere from 100 to 500% increase, and that's because they were being evaluated as speculative land value for their potential value. And that's when the highest and best use approach was used to evaluate these properties. MPAC would assess properties in 3 different ways. In theory, every single one of these 3 value approaches should come up with the same number. So if it's comparable sales approach, gives you 1 valuation using comparable sales. Whether it's income approach, which means that you take the rent rolls and you calculate that, you cap it, it should come up with exactly the same value as the comparable sales. Or if you calculate it by replacement value, the whole thing is burnt down, you have to rebuild it. That should also, in theory, come up with this exactly same valuation. Guess what? Doesn't work. And you probably, actually I can tell, is John Anderson here? No, John, okay. John is, he is the president of the small, Yonge Street Small BI Business Association, and they can tell you, they've run those numbers back and forth. In theory, that's the way it's supposed to roll out. In practice, it doesn't work. I'm really having technical problems here. Anyways, you would have just seen images of this. Storefronts started to plaster their windows with the Yonge Street revolt. They were so upset, and they had every right to be, because they were fighting for their livelihood. This was basically the last nail in the coffin for them. There's no way that they could have sustained or withstood that hike increase. During all this time, I was quietly putting in the government intervention. I was quietly working behind the scenes, bringing MPAC to the table, bringing the Ministry of Small Business to the table, working with the business owners on how to undo this massive problem that had kind of run away in one direction in the media, so there was a lot of anger, but at the same time, angry protest wasn't going to get us a solution. So we showed MPAC that they kind of miss some things. They came along and just took a look at the street and said, everybody's worth 40-story condominium tower. And we asked them to take another look. And we said, look, we put an HCD in place, which limits what type of development can go there. We also put a new OPA amendment, which of course also controls the development that was rapid. And they agreed. They reassessed 80 properties. They don't do that very often, but they reassessed 80 properties, and every single last one of them got a tax reduction. Some of them got relief by 50%. Some of them, and then we start to look at what's the solution. Now that we got you a temporary relief, what happens next? So we started to mumble about and said, let's put together a small business tax classification. Maybe that's going to help us, because there's no differentiation between the Eaton Center and the assets of Cadillac Fairview and Cat's Cradle. And then we said, well, you know what, let's just cap it for now. So that means that the growth of those property taxes, just think of it, it was sitting at 500%, 400, 300, 200, 100%. We said that this year's growth will be capped at 10%. The business owners were thrilled. It was just exactly what they needed, and they're still in business today. But we also know that the next round of assessments is coming in 2020, which means that they will get a new tax bill in 2021, because MPAC is going to do it again, and we don't have a permanent fix. I know that the city staff are working on this, and I've asked them to specifically make sure that we have to report back as soon as possible. And I know that there will be a report in Q2 of 2019 to find a more permanent fix. Chain stores, for those who don't like them, I know another policy direction we gave the city staff, or at least request, is how do we actually program it? What you would have seen there was literally a motion between Councillor Layton and I, where we asked city staff to come up with a retail strategy. Coming back to Yonge Street, and I'll get to the very end. This is a conversation that's been ongoing. and how do we respond to these imminent threats, and how do you maintain the character of these streets? I know Kim and James are here. They can tell you that when they were redoing and designing Yonge Dundas Square, what they told me is that there was an opportunity and a moment in time where they could have done Yonge Street, but it didn't get done then. So we missed that moment. In 2011, we said we're going to launch the pedestrianization of creating a friendlier Yonge Street. Remember this? 4 lanes of traffic, 2 lanes of traffic. 2016, we launched the environmental assessment process and have been quietly collecting a lot of data. There is a massive study underway. I know that some of the speakers have spoken to it. It is going to transform Yonge Street for the future, and this time I think it's real. If they had done it when they did Yonge Dundas Square, this whole conversation would be mute, so we missed an opportunity then. From pedestrian malls in the 1970s to celebrate Yonge, the very first time we introduced these new parklets in the city of Toronto, closing down 4 lanes of traffic to 2 lanes of traffic. I can't believe we're still pilot projecting this. And so the Yonge Tomorrow campaign, which is now the Yonge Street Environmental Assessment, every single one of you have an opportunity to get involved. This doesn't work without community, and it doesn't get done without the city. And just as I started my remarks by talking about the city not being this monolithic structure that sits at 100 Queen Street, but the city meaning all of us, including the citizens that live in these neighborhoods who have to take an active role in championing the things that they want. Yonge Street, and as a conversation as a main street and how to protect it and preserve it, has been going on for a very long time. We have an opportunity to do something amazing, such as narrowing the roadway, widening the sidewalk. Interestingly enough, this image was from our Yonge Street planning framework in 2011. I'm still floating it about because I still think it's relevant. And this is what it looks like, full pedestrianization. The early conversations with our stakeholder, just by way of example, they have gone a big, big distance. There is a push now within the neighborhood to pedestrianize all year round. That's the new shift that I've now seen. And it's going to get very, very exciting. You're welcome to attend the Yonge Street Tomorrow EA conversation, May the 9th. It's just down the street at the Marriott Courtyard. And we hope that you can stay involved. There is a website if you want more information. Thank you very much.